So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lewis. I'm a professor just up the road at the University of Wesminster. And I think the reason I've been put right at the end of this program is what I want to talk about is slightly different from what we've been hearing about so far. I want to try a thought experiment. And rather than talking about how we can change the world, how we can make the world better for the future, I want to imagine what would happen if the world were to come to an end, if something like this were to happen. There were to be some kind of global catastrophe, a doomsday event, an apocalypse. And the vast majority of humanity has died, and civilization has collapsed. Ooh. But we've all survived. Hooray! Let's say that the Faraday lecture theatre, where we're all huddled right now, has served as some kind of hardened nuclear bunker, and we have survived the end of the world when everyone else has perished and civilization has collapsed. And in about 20 minutes' time, we'll walk outside, blinking in the slightly frosty air of London in December, and see the kind of rubble and then the desolation, the wasteland around us. And the question that we would now have to be able to answer is, well, what now? What would we need to know? What would be the most useful knowledge, the most useful scientific understanding and technological ability that we would want to survive in this hypothetical post-apocalyptic scenario? Not just to survive in the short term. I'm not talking about Bear Grylls survival skills of killing badgers with your teeth. I mean, what could you do more in the long term? How could you go about rebooting civilization from scratch for ourselves? Could you accelerate the recovery process? Could you avoid another dark ages? If only you had the right information at your fingertips before that information was lost to history. What single book would you want handed to you as a community? You can see where I'm going. And Christmas is almost upon us. Would you want handed to you as our community of post-apocalyptic survivors that told you all of the most useful stuff from history, that the sum total of human knowledge that we've accumulated over hundreds of years and thousands and millennia, how could you preserve that so it isn't lost? And it has come as no surprise. That is the book that I've tried to write as a scientist, which is available outside, to explore the history of how we have developed and built our modern world, our modern civilization. Now, of course, I should come clean. I don't really think the world is about to end. I don't have some kind of the end of the world is nigh placard around my chest. I'm not some crackpot survivalist or prepper. But I think the notion of the apocalypse, of the loss of everything that we take for granted today in our modern, convenient lives, is a really useful way of exploring, a vehicle, a conceit, if you like, for exploring all the behind-the-scenes fundamentals of how our world works and how we built it over the years. And from all the other talks we've been hearing today, what do we need, what challenges do we need to be able to solve in the future? How have we set ourselves up from our own history to find us here and now to now be trying to solve these future challenges? So what I'm basically talking about is how could you do this for real? Could you do Minecraft for real? Could you start an empty, blank landscape and extract and harvest and scavenge what you need, different materials, different tools, combine them in different ways to provide for all of the substances and materials that we rely upon every single day of our lives without really realizing? Could we do this, but for real, to recover after an apocalypse? So what I did for this project was look through all the different areas of capability that we have built up over history. Everything from agriculture, not starving to death, different substances, different materials, medicine, transport technologies, communication technologies. Actually, the one that I found most satisfying to research and write for this project was that penultimate chapter, time and place. This is another thought experiment. Let's imagine, just for the sake of argument, that you wake up tomorrow and you have no idea where in the world you are, indeed when you are. You've just fallen through a time warp. You've woken up from a cryogenic pod. It doesn't matter. It's a thought experiment. What can you do? What can you observe in the natural world around you to work out where on the earth you are? How can you solve the problem of navigation and crossing the endless expanse of the oceans with no landmarks to navigate yourself by? How can you tell what time it is? How could you reconstruct the calendar? Because the very reason the calendar was invented in the first place by the ancient Egyptians was so we didn't starve to death. So you know the right moment to put your seeds in the ground and then the right moment to harvest them later before the winter draws in or the dry season draws in, and you end up starving to death if you haven't collected your harvest. These challenges of where I am and what time it is have been some of the biggest challenges we've solved through history. And I'll show you how you can do that from first principles in that penultimate chapter. But what I want to focus on for this short talk are just three quick things: agriculture, transport, and the greatest invention, which for greatest mystique, I'll leave right till the end. Now, at the very core of everything we do today is a very deep question, which I suspect has never really occurred to anyone. It hasn't struck you as being a weird thing that we do this. Why is it every single day of our lives, we wake up and for breakfast, we eat a slice of toast or a bowl of cereal. We eat wheat or Rice Krispies or bran flakes or oats. And indeed, not just for breakfast, but for every day, every meal of every day of our lives. And if we're not eating the cereal crops themselves, we're eating an animal that's been fed that grain, and we consume that ourselves. We eat cereal crops. That is a staple of our diet. And these are the most important plant species throughout history, these cereal crops. And in particular, the first three, wheat, rice, and maize, have supported every civilization, every city in Europe, Asia, and the Americas. And this fact that we eat cereal crops as our staple has meant that throughout human history, humanity, living today in our bright, glittering skyscrapers, we have eaten nothing more than grass. These cereal crops are all species of grass. They are fast-growing and provide a little dollop of nutrition. But we don't have 4 stomachs like a cow to enable us to eat that grass. Humanity's been hit with a fundamental biological problem from our own evolution. So when our ancestors 10,000 years ago decided to start farming these species, we couldn't apply our stomachs to the problem. We had to apply our brains. We had to invent something to enable us to eat these fast-growing grass species. And throughout history, the most important inventions here have been the water wheel and the windmill. These are obviously ways of harnessing natural power sources. Again, the kind of things we've heard other speakers talking about, renewable energy sources of hydropower and wind power. And the central components in both of these are those pair of cylindrical slabs of stone, the millstones. Those are forced to turn over each other. You put your grain in the middle and it's ground into flour. And we take that flour and we bake bread with it. We use the transformative power of fire to break down the complex molecules in that grain into something our bodies can actually digest and absorb. So in a very real sense, those millstones are like a technological extension of our own molar teeth. They do something our bodies could do already, but vastly more effectively and efficiently. And the oven that we invented to bake bread, or the pot we invented to cook rice in, is like an external pre-digestive system. We invented a stomach outside of our bodies that can digest and break down that nutrition so our bodies can then absorb it. And it's this adoption of cereal crops for the last 10,000 years, and now problems facing our modern society of climate change and having to adapt the cereal crops that we've been growing, particularly with increasing areas of drought around the world, that we're essentially having to respond to this technological lock-in of being so reliant on just a few species of crops. Now, I know some of you are probably sat there going, yeah, right, mate. I get that wheat was quite a big deal. I get that the windmill has been important through history. But let's play along with the thought experiment for the time being. What would I actually do with this information? Where would I go to get some seeds that I could put into the ground and grow if I ever did have to support myself in this hypothetical scenario? Well, the place in the world you would go to is here. This is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. This is essentially a genetic library. This is a repository of the seeds of every crop species we grow around the planet, and we've buried that, tunneled into the side of a mountain in this Norwegian island of Svalbard, right up by the North Pole, right up by the Arctic Circle. And the front door here, you can see on the bottom left, is a double pair of blast-proof doors. This facility can genuinely survive a nuclear exchange if one were to ever happen. So in order to reboot civilization, you'd get yourself up to Svalbard, Cross your fingers that someone's thought to leave the key under the doormat, otherwise you're going to have trouble getting through the double blast-proof doors. And you could help yourself to the seeds that you would need to reboot agriculture from scratch and keep history going on as our post-apocalyptic community. Now, I have very helpfully for you, if you don't know where Svalbard is, I have very helpfully provided for you the latitude and longitude coordinates in the bottom left of where you need to go to. And if you don't know where that is, if you don't know what that address means on the planet, or just important, if you don't know where here is, what is my address now? How do I get there? What direction do I need to head in? How far do I have to go? Turn to that penultimate chapter of the book, Time and Place, and it tells you from first principles how to work out all of that and navigate to wherever you need to be anywhere in the world. And again, in terms of the problems that are facing our society right now and the challenges we're trying to solve with climate change and global warming, we are already dipping in to this genetic library, this library of genetic diversity of crop species to start crossing back into the hybrids that we grow in our fields today with enormous yields to try to enable them to respond to this changing environment. This doomsday vault has got a very prosaic and everyday function, which we are already using it for. Now, in terms of transport, what you would really, really hope that you could prevent happening is for your society to regress, to slide back to a state like this, where you've lost engines, you've lost machinery, you've lost mechanization. You can't move things around anymore without resorting to having to use your own muscles and breaking your own back. This chap here, who sat on his Mad Max chariot, is looking particularly smug, but he's had to hitch it up to some draft animals, so some oxen or horse in this example. So the question here, and this is again relevant to the sort of questions that we've been hearing from other speakers, how do we keep our transport going? How do we keep machinery running without access to crude oil and the diesel and petrol that we refine from it? Because in a future world with crude oil running out or the climate change concerns, we're not going to be able to keep using it. And if we stick with my scenario in this hypothetical apocalypse, you will not be able to get any more crude oil if we ever had to start again. So to show you how you can run a car without using diesel or petrol, I've got a short video for you that links into this here. This is a gasifier stove that I made myself out of just 2 empty tin cans. And all I've done is put the smaller can in the middle, bigger can around the outside, drilled some holes in the bottom, and to run your gasifier stove, you put a bit of newspaper and twigs in the bottom, light it, and because of those air holes at the bottom, it draws through a nice strong current of oxygen of air for a nice vigorous combustion, just like any barbecue. But what is unique about that gasifier stove design is that there is a second row of holes right at the top. So after that wood has broken down in the heat of its own fire and given off lots of gases and vapors and smoke, which is itself combustible, you then reintroduce oxygen into that mixture of hot gases and burn all of that as well. It's incredibly efficient. Now, I do not get allowed, I'm not allowed anymore to do that demonstration live on stage. You guys know of the TED Talks, of the TED Lectures. I did a TED Talk last year and was sat in the makeup chair next to Monica Lewinsky thinking, oh my God, what do I say to Monica? How does one strike up a conversation when the only thing you know about her was something from the newspapers quite a few years ago? And I went out on stage and tried to demonstrate this gasifier stove on the TED stage on the red spot of doom, and had forgotten just how much hairspray they'd put into my hair, sat next to Monica Lewinsky in the makeup chair, and came that close to setting fire to my own face. So I don't do that anymore. And instead, I've got a video for you showing how this gasifier stove runs.
Fired up and see it working. I'll load it up with some simple Kindle.
Oh, don't burn your Kindle, it's rubbish.
Tinder here.
I would go for kindling instead.
Newspaper and some dried twigs, which we push down in here. If I light the underneath with a lighter, you've been able to scavenge. And while it smokes at the start, so we'll put slightly higher flue on it. And already that's roaring away with the air and the oxygen being drawn up So to get that going nice and intensely, burning down that fuel.
Just then, that's when I almost set fire to my face.
And if I
That
take
exact
off
instant.
this flue now, this is also called a rocket stove, perhaps for obvious reasons. If I take off that flue, if you come in here and look, you can see that upper ring of air holes. There are jets of flame coming out there where the oxygen is being drawn in and igniting all those producer gases coming off from the wood as it undergoes pyrolysis and gives off the vapor and the gas. And the smoke itself is combustible. So burning all of that is a very, very efficient way of using the fuel. So I reckon that's about ready for cooking. Put on my plate, and the custard we opened earlier, and get some dinner on the go.
Yeah, so I feel I should probably explain the custard. So this is the third in a series of 3 videos we recorded for the launch of the book. And the first of those was scavenging through an abandoned supermarket, trying to find some food, and I found a can of food, and I wasn't going to starve, but I didn't have a can opener. And so the first video is how can you open a can without a can opener, or indeed any other tool whatsoever. And there's an incredibly nifty trick that you can use for just popping off the lid of a can, if only you know how. And the punchline, the gag, if you like, at the end of that video was, oh, rubbish, it's cold custard. Who wants to eat cold custard? So the second video is how you can start a fire using just everyday items you can scavenge around, including, ironically, how you can start a fire using a fire alarm, or how you can start a fire using a bottle of water, which we'd normally use to put one out. And then the third video is how can you make the most effective use of that fire, which is where I start talking about this gasifier stove. Now, because this gasifier stove is incredibly efficient with the fuel, the wood you put into it, because it burns all the gases given off, and even the smoke itself, it's the kind of appropriate technology, or intermediate technology, which is being taught around the developing world now by organizations like United Nations and World Health Organization, so that families in sub-Saharan Africa can get the most use out of firewood they collect during a day. And the fact that these gasifier stoves are smokeless when they run means that they are vastly more healthy for cooking with in small, cramped conditions, because you're not inhaling all that smoke. And it's because of that process of pyrolysis, of gasification, where you turn wood into gas before then trying to burn that gas. And there are entire power stations up in the north, in kind of Scandinavia, in Norway, Finland, where they have large areas of forest, not a great deal of coal themselves, and they run entire cities and towns using that gasification process, because it's incredibly efficient. Now, what you can also do is you can take your gasifier stove, you can scale it up from something the size of an old baked bean can, scale it up to something the size of a dustbin, strap it to the back of a car, and you can run a car using wood as fuel. That is our gasifier stove on the back. That's where the wood is breaking down the heat of its own fire, giving off those gases and vapors which you pipe over the roof of the car, down into the bonnet, inject into the engine cylinders, and only then allow to mix with oxygen and explode usefully to drive your car forward. Now, I will admit to you, this does look like some kind of crackpot, steampunk, Mad Max monstrosity, but these things work. They work perfectly well. And in fact, during the Second World War, with all the fuel shortage back then, because we got quite good at blowing up each other's oil refineries, there were over 1 million gasifier-powered cars, wood-powered cars, driving along the roads of Europe. And it's this kind of technology, this kind of simpler technology that you could use to stop the further regression of your society after the apocalypse, before start pulling yourself back up by your own bootstraps. And it's also a really nice demonstration of that kind of renewable resources and energy technology that we are using around the world now to start trying to replace fossil fuels and trying to change the future. Thirdly, because I didn't want to leave you out with not knowing what the greatest invention is, my thunder's been stolen already, because we've heard all about the Weizmann Institution and how you do science. How do I find out something I didn't know before? What is the most effective way of exploring the natural world and generating new knowledge? Now, if you are trying to do science, and in our own history, going right back to the scientific revolution, the 1500s and 1600s, there is a critical substance in history. There is a substance which has a unique combination of properties that if you can't make that substance, you do not get to do science. And do not get to have a scientific revolution. You need something which is simultaneously pretty hard and strong, unreactive, and also perfectly transparent. And that substance is, of course, glass. That is the only thing you can make that has that combination of properties that you need to make everything from barometers and thermometers for measuring pressure and temperature and inventing the steam engine from that. And of course, we use glass in particular shapes to manipulate light itself, to make lenses for microscopes and telescopes, for exploring things that are too small for our eyes to be able to see otherwise, or too far away for us to be able to explore. So if you want to reboot science and relearn the world, you need glass. Now, it turns out that all of the raw ingredients you need to make glass can be harvested from the same idyllic Robinson Crusoe beach. The silica you can get from sand, the soda you can get from seaweed, and the lime you can get from baking coral or limestone or chalk or seashells lying around. And to prove this principle, I went to a beach to make glass from scratch in a Robinson Crusoe way. Not this beach, this is lifted straight off Google Images. I went to Norfolk. And in Norfolk, I collected sand, glasswort, which is a plant that creates soda in the same way that seaweed does, and some chalk, ground them all together, processed them using fire, melted it down into a kiln, and made my own glass from scratch in the course of a weekend, which I molded into a lens shape. And like a fool, I totally forgot to bring along with me this morning, so I could show you very smugly the glass that I've made from scratch, Robinson Crusoe style, which you could then use to reboot science with your lens and make telescopes and microscopes from. If any of this has been of interest, there's a whole website that has a lot more material, all the videos I've been showing you, links from lots of reading lists and how-to guides, kind of stuff you can do with your kids or your friends on a weekend. There's instructions for making a gasifier stove, maybe wait for summer before going out on the barbecue. And there's an article about Miley Cyrus as well. I argue that Miley Cyrus is the most important scientific experiment in history, and to find out why, you can go to that website and explore, because I'm not going to ruin that surprise. Thank you ever so much, guys, for listening so attentively.